This is chapter 11, part 4. We were talking about some of the impairments that come with use of marijuana. Let's move to the next point here. Significant impairments in attention and memory tasks have been demonstrated among heavy marijuana users 24 hours after they had last used the drug. So you can see that the attention and memory difficulties can last for a substantial amount of time. In this point, I think that I missed this earlier point. I skipped this with the change in segments here. So this first one here says the decline in sensory motor performance will persist well after the point at which the marijuana smoker no longer feels the high when there has been chronic heavy marijuana use. So that stresses the chronic the negatives of chronic heavy use of marijuana. So we're talking about the ways in which an individual is impaired and their ability to perform is impaired with the use, especially chronic heavy use of marijuana. This effect is likely due to the very slow rate with which marijuana is eliminated from the body, so that can help explain these long-lasting effects. Acute psychological effects, such as mild depression, panic reactions, or even mild paranoia as a result of marijuana with high levels of THC are also possible. So there are negatives. Of course, the drug, I think, in the culture tends to be portrayed all positively or mostly positively. But I think this chapter does a good job of kind of showing the positives and the negatives. Make sure that since I'm cutting short, not able to cover everything in the chapter, that you do focus on the negative aspects as well. Again, because I think it isn't always stressed as much as we need to be aware of kind of both sides, the positive and negative. So make sure to look at all that as you're reading through the chapter. With more typical THC levels, about 1/2 of marijuana users have reported at least one anxiety experience. So it's not uncommon at all. I mean, half have experienced anxiety with even typical levels of THC. Whenever you take drugs, you have different experiences, and some of those experiences can be negative, and that's certainly true with marijuana as well. Severe emotional responses such as a distortion of body image, delusions, hallucinations, and confusions can also occur, although that's usually going to happen with the higher levels of THC, and also individuals who may have a proneness to these problems in the first place. So there's a lot of individual differences here. One person could use even high levels of, take in high levels of THC, doesn't give them any of these negative reactions, but another person it does. So there's I think one thing that maybe the textbook could stress more is individual differences. Every person's put together differently and experiences things differently. Some more positive, some more negative. That's just individual differences. Let's see. There was little or no support for the idea that low THC doses will provoke such reactions in otherwise normal individuals. So we're talking about high doses causing those negative problems that were listed, but not so. The evidence isn't there for low THC doses. A substantially higher incidence of psychiatric problems arising from the THC exposure has been reported in both India and North Africa, but there we're talking about high levels of THC being ingested, and also the frequency with which the THC is ingested and the duration of the THC exposure over a lifetime. These numbers are generally higher in these regions of North Africa, of India, compared to the United States. And so you might see these sort of higher incidence, higher rate of psychiatric problems associated with the use in these other regions of the world because of the greater intense use, the greater concentrations of THC. So again, it kind of points to a theme you'll see throughout this semester and textbook, which is drugs tend to be more problematic with real intense levels. Okay, now, so due to time constraints, I had to stop right there. It goes on and talks a lot more short-term, long-term effects, positive, negative, uh, uh, cognitive deficits, lots of things, and then gets into other sections, which I'm not going to be able to cover due to time. But one thing I did want to fill in to finish up my coverage, my overview of this chapter, is what I have usually done this semester, which is to try to come up with a little bit more updated numbers on patterns of marijuana use, which one of the chapter sections that I won't be going over specifically is the patterns of marijuana use, and that's, again, a lot of that's because the data is a little older. I like to try to get the newest data I can. So let's just go over a few slides to finish up this final part 4. The first one I found here, this is a Gallup survey, which has asked people every year since all the way back to, say, 1970, about their use, and this is the samples of adults. Okay, so we're talking about grown-ups here, not because a lot of these drug surveys are targeting teenagers, but this is one for adults. And you can see that they ask them, have you ever tried marijuana? The first question, that's the light or green, well, the green line, talks about the percent, is the responses of random samples of adult Americans about have they ever tried marijuana. And you can see back in, say, 1970 that it was a very small percent, only 4% of adults had ever tried it. That gradually grew over the years and decades, but was kind of flat at about, say, maybe a third or so of adults through the 80s, through the 90s. But then you begin to see gradual increase, say around 2000. I mean, it's not real obvious, or 2010 or so. Let's say the past couple of decades, we've seen an increase of people who've tried it at least once, right? And that goes, instead of being somewhere like around a third, it's now moving closer to 40%. And in the past decade, you've got up to about half. If we had the numbers extended out to a couple more years past 2021, you'd see, let's go with a real rough number and say half of adults have tried it. And so that's showing an increase, a significant increase in the past decade plus. And probably some of that has to do with the greater acceptance of marijuana, the legalization of marijuana around many states of the country in the past decade plus. And so it's more available, more legally available. People are not in more places and circumstances are not breaking the law to try it, and some of it's going to be done in a medical context, medical use of marijuana. That's going to be some of it. But you can see that, probably you don't want to stick a number in your head. About half of adults is where we're at right now, and it's a lot more than it was 50 years ago. So it's become, basically what's the story there is sort of the mainstreaming of marijuana use among adults. Not that everybody does it, and these are just people who've just at least tried one, so it doesn't mean they're regular users. If we do look at more regular use, the blue line there you're talking about, they're asking about regular use, and you can see that has come up. We don't have data that goes all the way back to the 70s there. It's just been the past decade or so, and you can see that it's more it has come up some, but we're sitting at about 12%, or give or take. So regular users, it appears that it's gone up with legalization and greater legal access to the drug, that the regular users has increased some, but it's not, it's not very dramatic, say from 7 up to 12. So it's a minority. If you wanted to be real rough about it, say 1 out of 10, 1 out of 9 adult Americans uses marijuana regularly. Now compare that to alcohol. It's still, even though there's this mainstreaming effect of marijuana, it's not anything like alcohol. You're gonna get a lot more than 12% who are going to say that drink alcohol regularly. So it's not, marijuana is not mainstream to the effect where it's really, it could be considered very similar to alcohol. It hasn't got to that level. Now, this next slide here is of those who have used it in the past year, what were they using it for? Was it medical purposes, recreational purposes, both? And so here you can see this is, again, recent data, because 48% were there. We're getting close to half of adults have tried it. 12 in the past year, so that's a lot less if you're reducing it down to just, past year. But if you break down, well, why did you use it last time you used it? So about 30%, the most common answer is recreational. 47% used it just for fun. That's the most common context reasons why people are using it, of these people who've used it in the past year. 30% using it for medical issues, so that's significant. Then all these numbers are noteworthy, are pretty significant. 47, of course, is the biggest. But you also have 23% who said that they used it for both reasons, for medical reasons and also for recreational purposes. And so you can see that there's a mixture there, but there's plenty of each in each category. So it's not like it's all recreational or it's all medical. Recreation is number one, but there's plenty in the other categories as well. So that's just to give you a feel for what are most people using it for. Now this one here is focused on young people as opposed, well, it's to get more specific than that, it's called the age curve of marijuana use. So what we're looking at in the x-axis is the age of the person using the drug, or the percentage that are using it. That's x-axis, going all the way from the left-hand side is 12 years old, all the way up to senior citizens on the extreme right side of it. And then on the y-axis, you got the percent of the people that age that have used either in the past year or the past month. So the blue line is used it in the past year. The reddish line there having used it in the past month. And then I don't like these linear, these trying to make lines out of these curves. So just ignore those lines. Focus on the curve. Okay, so just remember blue past year, and then that reddish brownish color past month. You can see that it's rare among 12-year-olds, and a lot of this particular age curve is what you would expect. It's kind of common sense, but we always like to confirm our common sense with actual data. And you can see that the use is uncommon among preteens, but then you hit the teenage years, and whether you're focusing on past month or past year, it shoots up. It explodes. The numbers go up a lot. So adolescent years is where most kids are going to be trying this stuff, using cannabis. You can see that it rises steadily, dramatically through the teen years, and then if you're talking about past year, that it's peaking about age, looks like about 20, age 20. So basically a couple years into college, if you're going to college, that's going to be peak use in the past year. Basically the same story for more frequent use past month. It basically is peaking in other words, how many people what percent of an age group is using in cannabis. That number peaks around 20. In the case of using in the past year, it's between 35 and 40%. So that's a big number. That means that if you're 20 years old, that about 35 to 40% of your people your age are going to have used marijuana in the past year. So it's a big chunk of people, not the majority, but a significant percentage. If you're talking about more frequent use, monthly, there we're at not quite 20, it's 20 to 25%. Like a quarter, a fifth, or a quarter who are using, of 20-year-olds using in the past month. So again, it's not the majority of people, but there's a significant portion of young people who will use marijuana either maybe once in a while or a little more regularly than that. But then what you see after 20 is you see these steep declines, a big drop, both in past year and also past month is dropping all the way to senior, old enough to be a senior citizen. So throughout adulthood, once you get past those let's call them college years, uh, or if you're not in college, just kind of out of high school and a young adult, that as the years go by, the numbers drop. So it's really a very much a behavior most concentrated among young people, among young adults. Older teenagers, young adults. That's where it peaks, and that's true of a lot of things. That this crime curve is similar to this drug use curve, marijuana use, is similar to like the crime curve that you see. Delinquency takes off among teenagers. Preteens, not as much delinquency. It really takes off among teenagers, and by the time you're finished with your adolescent years, you're kind of moving away from it. If you're someone who's been rebellious and delinquent, you tend to sort of get past that phase as a young adult. And so the same sort of thing is happening with marijuana use as well. That when you're young, when you're sort of don't have a lot of responsibilities yet, you're more likely, you're hanging out with friends a lot more. Maybe have more leisure time on your hands, hanging out with people, partying more, socializing more use. But as you gain adult responsibilities, jobs, family, partners, maybe you're getting married, you're having kids, you're having to work a full-time job, and you don't have time to hang out with the friends as much anymore. Maybe don't go to the parties as often, too busy, too tired, too many responsibilities. Then the drug use drops. So that's a age curve. Peaks in adulthood and then drops steadily throughout adulthood, even although it keeps dropping. By the time you're a senior citizen, few people are using marijuana by the time that you're elderly. So that's an important kind of general pattern of a lot of sort of rebellious, or let's call it unconventional sort of behavior concentrated among young people. Now let's finish up. I think this is the last slide. Just the purpose here is just to give you recent data, to give you a flavor, at least a little bit of an idea about patterns of use. Now I found this graph here that's comparing countries around the world. And you've got different age groups. We don't need to focus on the age groups so much, different colors here. I'm interested in the countries where you see the highest bars. Of course, you're getting the most past month use, so a little bit more regular use or occasional use, we could call it. And that, for the number one country with the highest number is close to 15%, and that's Spain. You can see the United States is number two here, about 13% if you're talking about the young adults there anyway. So what I'm interested in here is comparing countries. So in this sample of what is it, about, I didn't count, maybe like 30 countries we're looking at here, and these are countries that are European countries, heavily European countries, and countries that tend to be more economically developed, more industrialized or wealthier nations, but not exclusively. But anyway, that's kind of what we're comparing here. And you can see the United States, among those kind of countries, the United States, number two after Spain. Now, it's usually one way to read these graphs, to make sense of them, is to look at the extremes. Look at the couple of highest, look at the couple of lowest, and begin to see if there's a pattern that emerges. So we're seeing the United States on one of the countries on the high end. If we look to the shortest ones, where there's least use, you see here, I see Turkey doesn't have much going on here. Romania doesn't have much going on here. If we look for other low extremes, Cyprus, not a whole lot. Greece, which would be related country, pretty low. So I'm seeing here that maybe there's an element of wealth here, that drugs are generally expensive, and you got to pay for them somehow if you're going to use them, especially if you use them regularly. So with a lot of in these courses where we're focusing on crime, a lot of street crimes tend to be more concentrated among the poor. Not so if you're talking about illegal drug abuse. There's a lot of drug abuse among middle class or upper class people who have the money to buy these drugs. So it could be in a country like the United States that you have a higher percentage of people who have what you might call disposable income, who have money that they above and beyond what it takes to pay the bills, to put food on the table and put a roof over your head and to have the essentials of life. Disposable income, that's like money that you can do this, that, or the other with because it's not needed to pay bills to just survive or pay for necessities. So people who have play around money, some of them might be tempted, might want to use drugs recreationally and have money available for something that's not necessary, that's not essential, like using drugs for recreational purposes. So I don't know that this graph is saying this. It's a little unclear what's going on, but it's possible that you might see tend to see, not always, but you might tend to see more use in countries where people have the money to be able to pay for these drugs, because again, these recreational drugs are not essential. They're something you do recreationally for fun, and that means something you don't have to do to survive. And that might help explain the higher use in the United States. You see France here, another Western European country, the fairly wealthy country. You see a lot of use. Germany is a little bit of a higher number too. Netherlands would be another one that's quite high. So I'm not sure if that's what's going on. But anyway, it's interesting to see how countries do vary a lot. They're not all the same. You've got countries with practically nothing going on, like Turkey, and then some with significant numbers like the United States or like Spain. So take that for what it's worth. We'll wrap up this chapter on that. I'm sure that some of these issues will come up in later chapters too. We'll have more to say about all this down the road.